Welcome to a 1v1 on Road to Kharkov. This game is going to be Fusrota! Playing as Soviets in the northwest against NGC Warmonger, playing as Oster in the southeast. And the Dragonborn has brought shock motor, advanced warfare tactics, and shock rifle. So pretty decent chance, and by pretty decent I mean 100% chance, of some Soviet late game heavy call-in units. And Warmonger has immediately chosen Encirclement Doctrine. That's an interesting choice. I don't think I've ever seen that used in 1v1 at all. This is very much a team game commander. I mean, when this just barely had come out and it was new, I saw it used in 1v1 a little. But because it has no late game call-in tanks, it seems like it's pretty unusual to see that in 1v1s, and I'm almost wondering if Warmonger is more of a team game player that's now transitioning into 1v1s and he's used to using encirclement, or maybe he's just experimenting with it. I don't know. We'll see. I almost wonder if he's going to get himself a sniper, because the sprint ability that it gives you to all of your infantry is very useful to have on the Oster sniper. And it can actually turn it from not so great into a pretty viable unit if you take advantage of that sprint ability. So we've added to the fatherland. Maybe that's what I think. That opens up that option a little bit. And I'm also very much expecting to see stormtroopers this game. I don't know, I'm curious. I'm curious to see how he's going to take advantage of this doctrine. On Road to Kharkov, the odds of you being able to utilize Close the Pocket are pretty good, since if you can take control of these 2 points, you cut off a significant portion of the map. But obviously that is an extraordinarily expensive ability. And Breakthrough is just a huge fuel expenditure that you can't generally afford in 1v1s. Break supply line, it's pretty cheap, but I mean, I don't know. If you want to use that in conjunction with Close the Pocket, it's almost 300 munitions just for some artillery that may or may not even be all that effective, so I don't know. We'll see what happens. We're going to have some pretty early caches going up here from Warmonger, throwing fuel up here behind his lines. He's got 2 squads of Pyos. I think we might even be seeing a second cache on this cutoff as well, while he's sent most of his infantry here to the left side victory point to slow the victory point bleed, since he's investing a lot of manpower into his economy here at an early stage of the game, putting up a bunker as well to defend. Meanwhile, the Soviet player is just going crazy on the right side with defenses, throwing mines down, setting up green cover positions to prevent counterattack, and moving across the left side with his conscripts as well. And thank you guys very much for following. I appreciate it. Conscripts taking up position inside of these houses. Pioneers will be forced to retreat away from the right side by the Allied infantry making its way to the front lines, and conscripts have mostly holed up in buildings here on the left to prevent further advance from these Axis troops. And at this range, I think the conscripts in the building will probably win against those grenadiers. This bunker has been upgraded with a machine gun and will prevent these conscripts from capturing this point, at least for now. He just Panzerfausted this building. That doesn't really do anything. Definitely should not have done that. Some wasted munitions early in the game. Conscripts making their way across the right side to get control of that strategic point, and we've got combat engineers making their way further down to plant further defenses, but it looks like they're not going to be able to get any mines down with the pioneers making their way to the front lines. And a mortar has been fielded here by Warmonger.
Ready!
The Grenadiers engaging those conscripts were forced to disengage after taking heavy damage and have retreated to behind this machine gun, but they're going to need to retreat to heal and reinforce, or they're not going to be very combat effective. The mortar making its way across the left will easily be able to force all infantry out of these buildings, but they're already retreating preemptively to receive healing in the Soviet base where field infirmary has been researched. A fresh squad of conscripts is being fielded now, which is going to bring him to 5 squads of conscripts, which is quite a few, but since he's gone shock motor already, he will be able to utilize them to repair in the late game.
Are ready to deploy.
Mortar bombarding the infantry in this green cover position may prompt it to retreat. They want to stick around and get rid of this minesweeper squad, though. This is pretty much just playing with fire, both of them just standing in this mortar barrage with no health remaining. When he sees the minesweeper retreat, he feels content to retreat himself since he knows no infantry is moving up to capture this point, so he did effectively stall the capture of that point for a little while by sticking around even in that mortar barrage, although it was dangerous to do so.
Machine gun squad.
Soviet players still making no attempt to take control of the victory point here on the left side, and continues to simply stand in cover and in buildings to prevent an Axis advance. Maintaining control of enough territory to build up a fuel reserve for his late game call-in tanks, but not being particularly aggressive. And while normally this may give the Ostheer a late game advantage, in this particular game, Warmonger has chosen Encirclement Doctrine, which means there are no late-game call-in tanks on the way, and he's going to be operating only on Tier 3 or Tier 4 tanks. And he has just hit 2 command points and fields his first squad of stormtroopers up here to harass the Soviet fuel. Whereas a Soviet player does have access to shock troops, but has not fielded any since most of his manpower is invested into these 5 squads of conscripts and a field gun that he just purchased. The field gun, once it hits the front lines, will be able to apply a lot of pressure to this scout car and certainly deny its ability to maneuver and harass Soviet infantry. Pioneer squad makes its way up the right side to take control of the strategic point. Conscripts move to counter, and we do have Molotov research there, forcing them from cover, and they will retreat. The stormtroopers here behind enemy lines are going to get this fuel under control, and the Soviet player will be forced to mobilize troops to respond to that. No upgrades being purchased on this squad for now, since Warmonger doesn't really have the munitions for it. He continues to micro his scout car around over here on the left side and is successful in forcing another conscript squad to retreat, and he has cut off the strategic point here in addition to the fuel point here. And rather than fully capturing the fuel point, which he would not be connected to, he continues to simply move about in decaptured territory. And if he had stuck around to capture that point, he probably would have been forced to retreat by those conscripts. So he's simply utilizing them behind enemy lines to disrupt his opponent's resources, which is really exactly what I believe this commander is intended to do. Whether or not that's going to prove effective, I think, is an entirely different matter. The Soviet player is up to 20 fuel right now because he just dropped a lot on the purchase of a Tier 3 structure. Since he's currently only got 13 coming in from this harassment, the T-70 or T-34 will be moderately delayed. And his stormtroopers actually just found a target of opportunity over here, taking out this field gun, which is rather unsupported since these squads of infantry have been forced to move and retake territory. They throw a bundled grenade and completely decrew it, but they're not going to be able to steal it without sacrificing the entire squad, and no support is anywhere nearby. But I would say that he got pretty good value out of that initial squad of stormtroopers, wiping out a field gun crew and decapping 3 sectors and just generally causing chaos behind enemy lines and making the Soviet players scramble to get that territory back under control. Meanwhile, on the left side, there doesn't seem to be any sign of the Soviet player breaking through this MG42/scout car defense, and the Ostheer player maintains a pretty good hold on half of the map, but if he can't get more than half of the map under control, he may find himself overwhelmed by an early Soviet vehicle. He needs to field a vehicle of his own quite soon, and play very much into the mid/early game since he has no Tiger on the way. He just sacrificed a Grenadier squad to take this field gun. I'm not sure that was probably worth it, honestly. A field gun costs a lot. A lot more than a Grenadier squad does. He doesn't have any 4-man squads anywhere available nearby, so that was his only option, and he decided that that was worth it. Grenadiers cost 240 and Stormtroopers are 340, so that was the more sensible option. If he can get that field gun back behind his own lines, that'll be a pretty big win for him and provide him with a little bit of moderate protection against the first Soviet vehicle, which will be hitting the field quite soon, since the Soviet fuel income has been restored. Unfortunately, the scout car hits a mine on its way back to the Oster base, so the 222 has been destroyed. Soviet player is executing a cutoff maneuver of his own here behind Oster lines. And it looks like this fuel is going to at least get decapped, since the Oster player doesn't really have any mobile infantry that he can deploy to get rid of that in the immediate vicinity. So he deploys himself some stormtroopers out of his rally point and sends them to force those conscripts to retreat, and they should easily be able to do so since the squad is already wounded, plus a flamethrower is moving up to help seal the deal. But the Soviet player is successfully in at least decapturing the fuel for now. That conscript squad will be retreating through the arc of fire of this machine gun, and at such low amount of health, I'm not sure if it's going to get away. It looks like it might. This squad of conscripts fortunately just moved up to absorb some of the fire, and the MG-42 will be forced to reload here. And if they continue to fire at that squad, then this one will be effectively screened and get away alive. A Molotov will also force the MG-42 to reposition. 2 flame crits, in fact, will prompt it to retreat. Stormtroopers that are still wounded are making their way across the right side to get some territory under control, and they should be able to continue across the right side and take other various territories. This point is still decaptured, which means that the Soviet player is cut off from all various territories here on the right. And these conscripts definitely need to move to take that strategic point back under their control at the earliest possible opportunity. Flamethrower is engaging a squad of conscripts over here on the left, but they've fallen very low and may be forced to disengage. He tries to go for some lucky flame crits, and the conscript squad is low, but he would have to walk through a Molotov to continue to close the distance, and he's forced to retreat. A mortar is moving up here back onto the front line to try to engage various squads that may attempt to capture territory on the left.
The enemy is taking our territory.
A support armor corps has gone up here in the Oster base, having researched himself battle phase 2. He will have access to an Ostwind. Throws the Ostwind on the field now, and it actually hits the field well before the first Soviet vehicle. His harassment of the Soviet fuel has been so successful that his first tank arrived before a Soviet one did. The problem is, by revealing this Ostwind to his opponent before he's made a tech decision of his own in the form of a T-70, he allows himself to be countered. A T-34 will be the logical purchase for the Soviet player once this Ostwind reveals itself. That being said, if the Soviet player were going to purchase a T-70, he would have by now, since he has the resources for it and is clearly holding out for a T-34, which is the smart thing to do since he doesn't want to get himself overwhelmed by the first Oster vehicle. So both of them playing, well, Soviet player playing in a slightly more defensive manner with his first purchase. Oster player, on the other hand, going with a more aggressive purchase, and he can afford to do this because he has this stolen field gun as a bit of a safety net against the T-34 once it hits the field. Pushed by that allied infantry, gets shut down by that Ostwind, as it should have been. He'll retreat, reinforce, and once his T-34 completes, he'll make another attempt at an attack at this Axis defensive line.
We have a forward structure under attack.
MG-42 bunker still stands over here. The Soviet player hasn't yet fielded himself a fresh AT gun, which he's probably going to need to do at some point. But a T-34 is actually enough to take on this bunker and the Ostwind by itself, as long as it doesn't get caught with engine damage in front of the stolen field gun. The stolen field gun, for its part, has still only got a 2-man crew and is quite vulnerable to being taken out by a lucky tank shot. To minimize that risk by taking that all the way back to base and reinforcing it, or building himself a half-track or command post where he could reinforce that in the field.
enemy has broken our supply lines.
Austrian moves to counter the infantry push here on the right side, and AT grenades have been researched, which means that he can damage the Austrian's engine before retreating and negate the risk of the Austrian chasing these retreating squads all the way back to base and potentially wiping them. And the various shot blockers here will provide sufficient cover for those conscripts to make a safe retreat. Meanwhile, here on the left side, a machine gun is being overwhelmed by the freshly produced T-34 with supporting infantry. The stormtroopers here have been upgraded with a Panzerschreck, however, and are dealing heavy damage to the T-34, which is also in the arc of fire of the field gun, and it gets taken out almost immediately. That was a huge misplay by Fusro Da, and he is probably very much regretting the loss of that field gun to his opponent now, but it looks like there is a small silver lining in the form of that stormtrooper squad not being monitored. What was that?
Our opponents are seizing a sector.
I just heard a stupid dive bomb. Oh no, it was the brake supply line. Oh, and he called that in on his opponent's cutoff. There's the crater. I'm so not used to casting this commander, I'm not even familiar with the abilities. Nice cutoff maneuver though with that brake supply line. That's going to cut off the Soviets' fuel over here on the right side again, and he capitalized on the fact that he was holding onto this territory here on the left side. Now the Soviet just threw away that T-34 and has only 7 fuel coming in. There's not going to be an ISU-152 anywhere in the near future. He probably won't have the resources for it when he does hit 12 command points.
Under fire! We are losing a sector.
Pioneers are repairing the Austrians' damaged engine over here on the right side. Soviet infantry are trying to make something happen over here on the left, while the Austrian is not available to counter. They force retreats from the various supporting infantry in the area before taking control of the victory points and fuel. Meanwhile, the repairs on the Ostwind have completed, and it may advance across the right side and take control of the Soviet cutoff, or it may make its way back to the left side and push away some of those Soviet infantry. And a Panzer IV is rolling onto the field now, making the situation for the Soviet player worse than it already is.
Fresh Grenadier Squad.
I'll just turn chat off.
Breakthrough tactics are ready for use, Commander.
Minesweeper's been upgraded on the Pioneer squad over here on the right side. Good call, because he's going to need Minesweeper support as his tanks advance along this route. He knows that there are a lot of mines over here, and he doesn't want to hit any more after losing his scout car to those. And he's actually utilizing Breakthrough, which I don't even think I've ever seen before. And although that costs him 40 fuel to do, it does open up his tanks the ability to capture territory quite quickly, by the way, over here on the right side. And he's going to actually just use that to decapture all of the territory. Interesting. He's not even capturing the sectors. He just wants to continue to shut down the Soviet fuel income and prevent the arrival of the ISU-152. Whether that was worth 50 fuel, I don't know. That is a lot of decaptured sectors. Like, that happened really quickly. Kind of cool, honestly. I've never seen this commander really fully utilized before. It's kind of exciting. Molotov gets tossed to the MG-42 over there. And the Austrian continues to apply pressure over here, inflicting a few losses on a shock troop squad, possibly taking shots at the Soviet base, dealing minor damage to the structure, and it looks like Fusro Da is going to give into the pressure and spend the last of his fuel reserves on another T-34. Don't know if I think that's a very good idea, though, since the Panzer IV is already on the field and will presumably be able to beat a T-34. He's certainly going to have to use the second one a lot smarter than the first one. If he loses that one in just a similar fashion, he's going to be in a situation he cannot come back from. He also really needs to do something about his terrible map control situation. Although, it is worth noting that the harassment of the left side is bringing in precious resources to the 9 into his opponent once again. And Warmonger looks like he's having a little bit of difficulty microing his infantry simultaneously with his tanks, although he has both of them in a pretty advantageous position, applying pressure to the Soviet base and to the harassing Soviet squads on his front line. Really needs to get those infantry moving out of his base and get some territory back under control. T-34 has been produced and is trying to fire on the Panzer IV. Both of them at similar health. T-34 gets a good frontal penetration though, and the Panzer IV has a damaged engine, which means it has no hope of escaping this situation. It almost looks like Warmonger has given it up for dead, probably with good reason, since with its damaged engine it cannot hope to outmaneuver this T-34, and it will easily be destroyed.
One of our panzers has been destroyed.
Which is, it just goes to show how important it is to pull a tank back to safety once it receives engine damage, because it has no way of escaping a dangerous situation like that. The T-34 itself is going to need to pull back for repairs, and since conscript repair has been unlocked by this commander, he should be able to get that repaired relatively quickly and hopefully take on this Ostwind. Retreating squad of conscripts is being chased down by these stormtroopers and does get nailed before they can get away, and the Soviet player's situation is looking worse and worse by the minute. This stolen field gun has had such a dramatic impact, and it will continue to serve as a safety net against that T-34 should it decide to charge against this Ostwind. Meanwhile, Warmonger is up to 88 fuel, and because he lost control of his own fuel point and only decapped the fuel on the right rather than fully capturing it, he's kind of in a similar fuel situation to his opponent right now. The fact that the T-34 is the more powerful tank compared to the Ostwind means that the Soviet does have some mechanism with which he can come back into this game, but he's going to need to execute flawlessly from this point forward. Stormtroopers try and make a push directly for the base structure to destroy it, but I'm honestly not sure destroying that would accomplish much, since I doubt he plans on making further T-34s. As long as he can keep this one alive, all remaining fuel is likely to go to the ISU-152. Shock troops that have been deployed recently are now trying to get control of the north half of the map back, and Warmonger is similarly just trying to get territory on his half of things back under control. Overall, though, this has been a rather chaotic game for map control, since the encirclement doctrine has been used to pretty good effect to cut the Soviet player off constantly. He's had to spend a lot of time dealing with the fact that he's been cut off on his half of the map. That T-34 is moving in to engage that Ostwind without being repaired. It takes a Panzerfaust from screening grenadiers right there, and the Ostwind will blitz to safety. Now that T-34 is in a very dangerous situation, and I'm not sure it's going to get out of this alive. The field gun is not being deployed to deal with this. Honestly, the Ostwind might even be able to destroy that thing if it moved up and fired on its rear armor. A second Panzerfaust also threatens to destroy it, but he just spent 25 munitions to sprint them, I guess, for some reason. And now he's completely out of munitions, so it looks like the T-34 will survive an extremely dangerous situation. Soviet player really needs to get this cutoff back under control. He has taken all the resource points back, but it does not hold the cutoff.
We have only 50 points remaining.
Although since he holds this cutoff, I guess he actually is still connected, so not as big of a deal. Grenadier squad is not being monitored over here on the right side, and it gets wiped by this squad of conscripts. The squad of stormtroopers is sprinting past the conscripts towards the cutoff, but they're going to get gunned down by these shock troops. So we put those stormtroopers in an extremely dangerous situation with very little gain, and they risk getting wiped on retreat. A shock troop squad making its way across the left side is forced away by MG-42 fire and mortar fire, and the Soviet player has full victory point control right now and is going to win the game.
I fear we are losing. With 10 points remaining.
He's got squads that he could go take the VPs with. But that's it. GG, apparently Soviets win. That is that's kind of a shame, since I thought we saw pretty good usage of the encirclement doctrine here, and Soviet player had basically no squads left. I think that may have just been an accident by Warmonger. Maybe he wasn't really paying attention to the VPs. I don't know. He'll have to be more attentive to the victory point clock. I mean, it's quite obvious that this is more of a low-skill game, but I still thought that it had merit. I'm glad that this was submitted for me to cast because I enjoyed it, even if the players were not the best of the best of the best, sir. So, good game. Allies win.